stars explode in the quiet night.
Chapter 1: The Glittering Chaos. The horizon's whisper shuddered, a deep, groaning tremor that vibrated through the deck plates and up into the soles of Dr. Aris Thorne's boots. He gripped the cold alloy of the command console, his knuckles white, as the view outside the primary viewport dissolved into a maelstrom of shimmering, iridescent dust. "Whisper report, give me stability," he barked, his voice tight. The ship's AI responded, its tone a flat, genderless cadence that belied the urgency of its words. "Atmospheric perturbation Delta 7, spore density at 98%, hull integrity nominal, biofilter efficiency at 92% and declining. Warning, prolonged exposure risks uncontrolled symbiotic bonding with ship systems." Aris's eyes remained fixed on the churning vista. This wasn't a weather pattern, it was a biological event. The planet below, Duavita, was invisible, hidden behind a storm of its own living essence, symbiont spores. They glittered like powdered gemstones in the relentless light of the twin suns, Gemini A and B, two brilliant white orbs locked so close in their dance they appeared to share a single, fiery atmosphere. The spores scoured the hull, not with the fury of ice or sand, but with a persistent, probing intelligence. They were seeking, always seeking for a connection. "Get us lower, whisper, find a clearing, any patch of ground that isn't actively trying to merge with something else." Stability on Duavita is a relative concept. Landing site identified, designation the Glade of Transience. Long-range scans suggest a zone of minimal active merging, initiating descent protocol. The whisper groaned again as it angled its nose down and plunged into the glittering torrent. The light outside the viewport dimmed, then flared with violent rainbowed hues as the ship fought its way through the spore-dense upper atmosphere. For a terrifying moment, the console lights flickered, and Aris felt a bizarre, staticky buzz in his teeth, a sure sign the nanites were testing the ship's electronic synapses. Then they were through. The ship broke into the relative calm of the lower atmosphere, and the glade spread out beneath them. Aris let out a slow breath. Relative was, again, the operative word. The Glade of Transience was a vast basin carpeted in a thick, moss-like organism that shifted in slow, breathing undulations. The trees were not mere plants, they were complex, semi-permanent symbiotes. One nearby had the trunk of a thick-barked giant, but its upper branches were fused with the carapace of a massive, beetle-like creature, its 6 legs acting as moving roots, its mandibles slowly pruning the photosynthetic leaves that grew from its own back. It was a walking, feeding, photosynthesizing hybrid. As Aris watched, a flock of avian analogues, creatures with 4 wings and feathers that shimmered like oil on water, streaked overhead. To avoid a diving predator, their wings momentarily merged, their individual bodies flowing into a single, vast, flowing canopy that scattered the light before splitting apart into a dozen individuals once more, chittering in what sounded like triumphant relief. It was chaos, a beautiful, terrifying, and utterly magnificent chaos. The whisper settled onto the mossy ground with a soft hiss. The landing struts sank slightly, and the moss pulsed a faint, bioluminescent green in response, then returned to its usual deep purple. Aris ran through the post-landing checks, his movements practiced but eager. This was it. Exobiology Survey Mission 7-Eater, the crown jewel of his career, the chance to study the most radical ecosystem ever discovered. He donned his full environmental suit, the seals hissing tight. The suit was state-of-the-art, equipped with a multispectral bioscanner and a low-yield repulsor for defense. Its most critical feature was its biofilter, a microscopic mesh designed to block symbiont nanites. On Duavita, a breach wasn't just a contamination risk, it was an identity risk. The airlock cycled open, and Aris stepped onto the surface of Duavita. The first thing that struck him was the hum. It wasn't a sound heard so much as felt, a low-frequency thrum that vibrated in his bones. The air was thick, sweet with the scent of alien pollen and damp earth, and it glittered with the ever-present spore dust, catching the light of the twin suns. His boots sank into the soft, living moss, and he immediately felt a faint, tingling sensation crawl up his calf. Minor nanite probe detected at point of contact. Whisper's voice chimed in his helmet comm. Suit integrity holding at 100%. Biofilters nominal. Acknowledged, Aris murmured, activating his wrist-mounted bioscanner. The device whirred, its sensors drinking in the data. Text and holographic readouts flickered before his eyes. Local atmosphere saturated with symbiont nanites. Function catalyze rapid, non-permanent cellular merger between compatible life forms. Primary drivers, mutual benefit. For example, defense, resource acquisition, mobility. Bonds dissolve when the catalyzing threat or need has passed. Fascinating, he whispered, a grin spreading across his face. Survival through constant, negotiated alliance. He moved cautiously away from the ship, his scanner panning across the glade. His first real subject was a small, six-legged creature he designated a forage skitter. It had a rabbit's timidity and a squirrel's speed, its fur a mottled gray and green. It was nibbling on a low-growing, thorny bush when a shadow passed overhead, one of the four-winged predators. In a flash of instinct, the skitter didn't flee. It pressed itself against the thorny bush. There was a soft, visible shimmer in the air between them. Instantly, the skitter's hide thickened, grafting bark-like plates onto its back and flanks. Simultaneously, the bush's thorns retracted, and its leaves unfurled, pressing against the skitter's body. The scanner registered a rapid exchange of nutrients and chemical signals. The bush was getting direct access to the skitter's nitrogen-rich waste. The skitter was getting camouflage and armor. The predator swooped, missed, and soared away. The moment it was gone, the shimmer returned. The bark plates on the skitter dissolved back into its own flesh, and the bush's thorns re-emerged. They separated, the skitter skittering away and the bush settling back into its stationary form. Both were unharmed. Both were better off for the temporary union. Incredible, Aris breathed, recording the entire event. The nanites don't force the bond, they simply enable it. They are the language, the treaty, and the handshake all in one. For days this was his rhythm. He would emerge from the whisper at first light, documented the glade's awakening, a daily renegotiation of alliances as creatures and plants assessed their needs under the twin suns. He saw a predator, a sleek, feline-like hunter, merge with the very air around it, its form blurring into near-perfect invisibility as it stalked its prey. He documented a colony of ant-like insectoids swarming together, their bodies fusing into a temporary, larger creature with a visible spark of collective intelligence to solve the problem of crossing a wide stream before dissolving back into 1,000 individuals. He witnessed his first spore storm from the ground. It rolled into the glade not as a cloud, but as a visible wall of iridescent energy. The hum of the planet intensified into a demanding roar. Life reacted instantly. Trees pulled their roots from the ground, merging with burrowing creatures to anchor themselves deep underground. Grazers fused with swifter, more stable creatures to form larger, sturdier beings that could withstand the wind. The forest floor itself seemed to ripple and change as the moss merged with underlying fungi to form a tougher, protective layer. It was a planet-wide dance of avoidance and cooperation. When the storm passed, the bonds dissolved in a wave of gentle shimmering, and the glade returned to its complex, individualistic dance. It was on the 5th day after the storm had passed that he found the silence. He was taking a perimeter scan near the western edge of the glade when his audio pickups registered a drop in the ambient bioacoustics. The constant chirps, chitters, and rustles of the glade faded, replaced by an unnerving stillness. Pushing through a curtain of vines that momentarily tried to twine around his arm, he stopped. Before him was a patch of ground, roughly 10 meters across, that was utterly lifeless, not dead but void. The pulsating moss was gone, replaced by a slick, oily purple sheen. Nothing moved upon it. No skitters ventured near it. No shifting trees bordered its edge. It was a scar of perfect stillness. A sense of profound unease settled in Aris's gut. Whisper, "Are you seeing this? Scan this patch." He aimed his bioscanner. The readouts, usually a cascade of green and blue data, flashed an urgent, warning red. Anomaly detected. Cellular structure undergoing forced, permanent assimilation. Aggressive nanite signature detected, highly aplastic. Designation, Vorax strain. Vorax, Aris muttered. What's a Vorax? As if in answer, a forage skitter, panicked by some unseen threat, bolted from the undergrowth and stumbled into the edge of the purple patch. What happened next was not a symbiosis, it was an annihilation. Tendrils of viscous, purple energy, like animated oil, lashed out from the slick with terrifying speed. They wrapped around the shrieking skitter, engulfing it in a heartbeat. The creature's terrified squeals were cut off into a wet, gurgling choke. Aris watched, horror-struck, as the skitter's form dissolved. Its distinct shape melted away, its colors bleached into the uniform, ugly purple, its biomass adding to the mass of the patch. The entire slick pulsed, and Aris saw it grow, expanding outwards by a few centimeters. A low, predatory thrum emanated from it, a sound that vibrated unpleasantly in his chest cavity. Whisper, what in the seven hells was that? Track its growth rate, analyze. Vorax strain, rogue symbiont variant, origin unknown. Function, forcibly assimilates all biomass it contacts into a homogeneous, mindless mass. It disrupts and overrides the natural bonding and dissolution mechanisms. Scanning, confirmed. Spread is exponential. Panic, cold and sharp, lanced through Aris's scientific fascination. This wasn't a part of the balance. This was its antithesis. He saw it happen again. A bird analog, flying too low, was snared by a lashing purple tendril that shot up from the mass. It was pulled down, absorbed, and silenced in seconds. The blob grew again. It began to ooze towards a cluster of the tree beetle symbiotes. The beetles, sensing the threat, tried to separate to flee, but one was too slow. A tendril caught it, pulling it from its tree partner. The bond between the remaining beetle and the tree didn't dissolve. It froze, trapped in a half state. The Vorax assimilated the beetle, pulsed, and then sent new tendrils towards the now helplessly rooted tree. Upon contact, the tree's vibrant green leaves withered to black in an instant, its bark sloughing away into the same glossy purple. "It's perverting it," Aris breathed, his blood running cold. "It's turning connection into consumption. It's a cancer." He backpedaled, his heart hammering against his ribs. A tendril, sensing his movement, slithered towards him. On pure instinct, he fired his suit's repulsor. The low-intensity energy beam washed over the purple ooze. It absorbed the energy with a greedy glimmer, and the tendril continued its advance, now slightly larger. Warning: Vorax absorbs and dissipates conventional energy. It is highly resistant. "I see that," Aris snapped, retreating faster. He reached the safety of the vibrant moss, and the tendril retracted, as if recognizing a border it was not yet ready to cross. He stood there, breathing heavily, watching the purple scar slowly, inexorably, eat into the beautiful, chaotic life of the glade. The hum of potential now felt like a scream of warning. He had come to Duavita to study the miracle of symbiosis. He had just discovered the virus that was poised to destroy it. "Log entry, Dr. Aris Thorne," he said, his voice low and grim, transmitting back to the whisper. "I have made first contact with a hostile non-symbiotic life form. Designation Vorax. It represents an existential threat to the Duovitan biosphere. The parameters of this mission have just changed. This is no longer a survey. This is a quarantine." He looked back at the silent, spreading purple, then up at the sky, where another spore storm was gathering on the horizon. The beautiful chaos was under siege, and he was the only one who knew. Chapter 2: The Scourge of Unity. The silence was the most profound change. Over the next week, the glade of transience, once a vibrant orchestra of chittering, rustling, and humming life, fell quiet. The silence was punctuated only by the low, predatory thrum of the Vorax and the occasional, swiftly cut-off shriek of its latest victim. Aris Thorne became a chronicler of an apocalypse, his days measured in the relentless, geometric spread of the purple blight. From the relative safety of the horizon's whisper, he monitored the planetary scans, his stomach churning as the data crystallized into a grim forecast. The Vorax wasn't just spreading, it was learning, adapting, metastasizing. Whisper overlay the Vorax growth patterns with atmospheric data and native life migration, he commanded, his voice rough with lack of sleep. The main holo display flickered, painting a terrifying picture. The purple patches weren't random. They spread along the natural corridors of the biosphere, the migratory routes of grazer herds, the wind-borne paths of the spore storms, the river valleys where life congregated. Whisper said, "Analysis confirms Vorax demonstrates predatory intelligence. It identifies and exploits biological pathways for maximum assimilation efficiency. Growth rate is exponential. Projection: full biospheric collapse in 43.2 standard days at current rate." 43 days. Aris sank into his chair, the number hanging in the air like a death sentence. He had watched it happen over and over through the ship's external sensors. He'd seen a majestic, feline-like predator that could blur into the air, a phantom stalker attempt to ambush a small Vorax patch. The moment it made contact, the purple ooze had latched onto its form, not just consuming it, but locking the stalker into its invisible state. The result was a terrifying, permanent phantom, a patch of shimmering, vacant air that thrummed with the Vorax's hunger, an invisible trap. "It perverts everything," Aris murmured, replaying the footage. "It doesn't just kill, it corrupts the very concepts of survival here." His attempts to fight it directly were laughable. He'd used the Whisper's low-power laser cutters to try and cauterize a small patch. The Vorax absorbed the energy, pulsed, and grew faster. He tried chemical agents designed to break down complex organic chains. The Vorax simply incorporated them, its purple sheen taking on a corrosive, acidic property. It was a perfect, mindless engine of consumption, immune to conventional attacks. His focus turned to the planet's own defenses. There had to be something. He pored over the scanner data from the initial Vorax encounter, looking for anomalies, for anything that had survived contact. Whisper reanalyzed the sensor logs from my first encounter. Focus on the periphery of the Vorax zone. Look for any biological signatures that persisted within a 10-meter radius for more than 5 seconds. Whisper said, reanalyzing, signature detected, multiple in fact, designation shifters, frequent, brief contacts at the Vorax perimeter, too rapid for standard scanning protocols to lock on. Shifters, the name from the initial scan. He pulled up the fragmented data, blurs of motion, flickers of iridescent light. He had no visual, only the energy signature of their disruptive pulse. Can we predict where they'll appear? Can we attract them? Whisper said, insufficient data. Their patterns are chaotic. However, they are attracted to Vorax activity. Hypothesis, they are a native immune response, albeit an ineffective one at this scale. An immune response. It was the first flicker of hope he'd felt in days. He needed to see one up close. He needed to understand their mechanism. The opportunity came when a new Vorax patch erupted a kilometer east of the Whisper, a smaller one, consuming a grove of pulsating, bioluminescent fungi. Aris took the symbiote, the small, agile research shuttle, and hovered at a safe distance, his scanners at maximum sensitivity. For an hour, nothing. The Vorax spread, turning the gentle, pulsing glow of the fungi into a uniform, ugly purple. Then a flicker. A tiny, lizard-like creature, no bigger than his hand, darted from behind a rock. Its scales shifted color so rapidly, it was a smear of rainbow light. It moved with impossible, jittering speed, a series of leaps and dashes that seemed to defy physics. It ran straight towards the Vorax. Aris held his breath. A tendril lashed out. The shifter didn't dodge so much as it ceased to be where it was, reappearing a foot to the left. It reached the edge of the ooze and with a deliberate tap of its claw, made contact. A flash of brilliant silver light, so bright it left an afterimage on Aris's retina. A dinner plate-sized patch of the Vorax turned instantly gray and crumbly, like desiccated ash. The shifter was already gone, a disappearing speck of iridescence. "Magnificent," Aris breathed. "Whisper, did you get that?" Whisper said, affirmative. The pulse is a precise, high-frequency resonance. It vibrates the Vorax nanites at a destructive harmonic, causing their internal bonds to shatter. It is the antithesis of the symbiotic catalysis. It's a cancellation wave, Aris realized. Where the native nanites build bridges, the shifter pulse collapses them, but it's too localized. One shifter against this, it's a pebble against a glacier. As if to prove his point, The small crater the shifter had made was already being filled in by the oozing, surrounding Vorax. The effort was meaningless. Dejected, he returned to the Whisper. For the next 2 days, he worked furiously, trying to synthesize the resonant pulse. He used the shifter's energy signature as a template, attempting to create a field emitter that could broadcast the same effect. The results were disastrous. The first test, at low power, caused the ship's biofilters to flicker and fail for a millisecond, letting in a cloud of symbiont spores that immediately tried to merge a control console with a nutrient dispenser. The second test, contained in a quarantine field, produced a weak, distorted pulse that the test sample of Vorax biomass simply absorbed after a brief stutter. Whisper said, "The pulse is not merely an energy signature. It is a biological phenomenon integrally linked to the shifter's life cycle and its own symbiotic nature. Attempts to replicate it with technology are inefficient and lack the necessary finesse." "Finesse," Aris scoffed, running a hand through his greasy hair. "So we have a perfect weapon we can't use, carried by a delivery system that's too small and fragile to make a difference." He looked at the planetary scan. The Vorax had consumed another 2% of the glade. The great, walking tree beetles were gone, replaced by a twitching, purple plane. He was staring at the real-time sensor feed when he saw it happen. A spore storm, a small one, swept across the new Vorax front. The reaction was horrifying. The Vorax didn't try to hide or anchor itself. Instead, it launched globs of itself into the air, like sticky purple spores. The wind caught them, carrying them hundreds of meters beyond the main blob's edge, where they landed and immediately began to consume new patches of healthy biosphere. "It's using the storms," Aris whispered, a cold dread seeping into him. "It's learned to use the planet's own distribution system against itself." That was the tipping point. The Vorax was no longer just a predator, it was a plague, and it was evolving faster than he could study it. The beautiful, chaotic balance of Duavita was being systematically dismantled by a force that understood connection only as consumption. He stood up, his decision made. The academic was gone, only the desperate survivor remained. "Whisper, prepare the neural sim link. Full interface protocols. I want every safety override disengaged. I need a pure, high-bandwidth connection." Whisper said, "Dr. Thorne, the risks are catastrophic. Permanent neural damage, personality dissolution, biological assimilation." "I am aware of the risks," Aris snapped, his voice cracking with strain. "But the alternative is to sit here and watch this world die. The shifters are the key. Their pulse is the only thing that works. We can't synthesize it, so we have to use the source. We have to join the source." He paced the length of the cockpit. "The next major spore storm is forecast in 18 hours. That's our window. Modify the symbiote to broadcast a composite signal, a mix of Vorax distress frequencies and shifter attraction pheromones. We need to draw every shifter in this sector to us. We use the storm's energy to forge a bond, and we use that bond to fight back." Whisper said, "Confirmed. Initiating modifications. The Gestalt entity will be unprecedented. Your consciousness will be the anchor, the guiding will. The shifters will provide the numbers, the speed, and the weapon. You understand you may not be able to dissolve the bond." Aris looked out the viewport at the swirling, iridescent sky. The twin suns were setting, casting long, distorted shadows from the grotesque, purple formations that had once been a forest. "I understand," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "Sometimes, to save something, you have to become part of it. Prepare the link. We're going to give the Vorax a storm it can't consume." As the Whisper's systems hummed with new, dangerous purpose, Aris Thorne began the meticulous, terrifying process of preparing his mind to cease being singular. He was going to dive into the chaos, not as an observer, but as a conductor. He was going to forge a weapon from the planet's own soul, and hope that in doing so, he didn't lose his own. Chapter 3: The Gestalt Gambit. The air inside the Horizon's Whisper grew thick with the smell of ozone and anxiety. 18 hours was both an eternity and the blink of an eye. Aris spent it in a feverish cycle of preparation and meditation. He reviewed every scrap of data on the shifters, memorizing the fragmented patterns of their movement, the exact frequency of their disruptive pulse. He ran diagnostics on the neural sim link, a delicate silver crown of filaments and sensors that felt unnervingly cold against his temples. Neural interface calibration complete, SimLink ready, warning, psychological protocols are disabled. The Gestalt may overwhelm your sensory and cognitive functions. Recommend abort. Noted, Aris said, his voice flat. He stared at the storm tracker on the main display. The wall of iridescent dust was now visible from the viewport, a towering, shimmering wavefront advancing across the glade. The planet's hum had risen to a fever pitch, a demanding, psychic scream that vibrated through the ship's hull. Life below was scrambling, preparing for the forced intimacy of the storm. He stepped into the airlock, the symbiote shuttle waiting just beyond. The small craft hummed with its new, illicit programming, broadcasting a complex signal, a siren song of Vorax threat signatures and shifter kinship pheromones. It was a beacon of desperation. Initiate sequence, Whisper. The moment the storm front hits, activate the sim link. Sequence initiated. May your connection be fluid and your dissolution clean. The Ari's morbid well-wishing was the last thing he heard before sealing his helmet. He stepped out onto the moss. The wind was already picking up, whipping glittering spores into a frenzy. The air crackled with potential, a static charge that made the hairs on his arms stand on end. He took his position beside the symbiote, the neural crown humming to life. Through his visor, he watched the storm front engulf the far end of the glade. Trees fused with the earth, creatures merged into defensive hulks, the very landscape reconfiguring in a wave of shimmering light. Then, the wall of dust hit him. It was like being submerged in a galaxy. Iridescent particles scoured his suit, reducing visibility to zero. The hum wasn't a sound anymore, it was a physical pressure, a demand that echoed inside his skull. Connect, merge, become. He felt the nanites probing, their presence 1,000 tiny needles of intent against his mind. He fought the instinct to recall, instead focusing his will, projecting it through the sim link. Bond, protect, disrupt, together. For a long, terrifying moment, there was nothing but the storm's chaotic imperative. Then he felt them. A flicker at the edge of his perception. Then another, dozens, hundreds, tiny, frantic consciousnesses drawn by the symbiote's call. They were pure sensation, blurs of motion, starbursts of color, the sharp, electric fear of prey, and the relentless, driving need to strike. The shifters swarmed around him, a cyclone of iridescent scales and lightning-fast thought. He opened his mind. The connection was not a gentle merging, it was a collision. Aris Thorne, the singular, rational human consciousness, was shattered. He was 100 pairs of multifaceted eyes seeing in every direction at once. He was 100 tiny hearts beating a frantic, syncopated rhythm. He was the sensation of moss under 1,000 scrambling claws, the taste of Vorax-tainted air in 100 mouths, the dizzying, jittering calculation of 1,000 possible trajectories every second. It was a cacophony of instinct, a tsunami of raw data. Predator, strike, disrupt, flee. The shifter mind was a storm of its own, all reaction and no reflection. For a moment, Aris felt himself dissolving, his identity scattering into the frantic chorus. He was drowning in the swarm. No, he grasped for the one thing that was uniquely his, purpose. He focused on the memory of the Vorax, the silent, spreading purple death. He projected the image, the feeling of revulsion, the cold, hard calculus of extinction, not flee, fight, together. He poured his will into the link, not as a command, but as a foundation. He became the anchor in their storm. He was the strategy to their tactics, the map to their motion. The cacophony began to order itself. The 100 frantic consciousnesses didn't quiet, they harmonized. The fear was still there, the speed was still there, but now it was channeled, directed. Neural synchronization achieved. Temporary symbiotic gestalt established. Designation Aris Shifter Swarm. The thought was both his and not his. He was Aris, but he was also the swarm. He felt the collective power of their resonant chambers, 100 biological capacitors humming with energy, now linked and amplified by the focused power of his human brain. He was the weapon. The swarm moved. It didn't run or fly, it flowed. A river of liquid silver over the pulsating moss, guided by Aris's intent towards the nearest major Vorax blob, the same one that had consumed the tree beetles, now a small mountain of twitching purple biomass. The Vorax sensed them. Tendrils, thick as pythons, lashed out from the main mass with shocking speed. But the swarm's perception was a sphere. They saw the attack coming from every angle, and their reaction was not a dodge, but a reconfiguration. Guided by Aris's tactical mind and the shifter's innate agility, parts of the swarm momentarily merged with the ground, becoming intangible, while others flowed over the tendrils, their combined speed making the attack seem sluggish. They reached the base of the blob. Aris felt the swarm's collective urge to strike, to release the built-up resonant energy. He focused it, sharpened it. Now, 100 of shifters, their tiny bodies pressed against the purple ooze, unleashed their pulse in perfect, amplified unison. A wave of intense, high-frequency silver light erupted from the swarm, a visible shockwave of pure disruption. Crack, 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 crack. The sound was like a glacier shattering. Where the light touched, the Vorax turned instantly gray and brittle, fracturing into a fine, crystalline dust that was whipped away by the storm winds. A crater large enough to park the symbiote was blown into the side of the blob. The entire mass recoiled, its predatory thrum twisting into a pained, subsonic shriek that vibrated through the gestalt. Elation surged through the swarm. It was working. The Vorax fought back with a mindless, adaptive ferocity. It launched globs of itself, mini-blobs designed to engulf and assimilate parts of the swarm. Aris felt a terrifying pull as a dozen shifters on the periphery were too slow, snared by the grasping purple. Their individual consciousnesses screamed into the link, a sensation of dissolution and horror before being abruptly silenced. The loss was a physical wound, a tearing away of part of himself. The swarm reeled, their collective confidence shaken. "No reform," Aris commanded, pouring energy and determination into the link. He forced dissolution where bonds were attempted, pulling the swarm back from the edges, recoalescing them into a cohesive whole. It was a dance on a razor's edge, a constant, exhausting calculation of attack and defense, of sacrificing a few to save the many. He saw it then, deep within the convulsing blob, a denser, darker purple nexus pulsing with a malevolent rhythm. The core, the source of the coordination. The heart, he projected, and the swarm understood. They surged forward, a silver spear aimed directly at the core. The Vorax threw everything it had left. It formed a solid wall of lashing tendrils and grasping pseudopods, a final, desperate barrier. Aris didn't slow. He fed a complex, instinctual command to the swarm, a maneuver born from their combined natures. Scatter-merge. In perfect unison, the Aris shifter swarm dissolved. Individual shifters merged instantly with nearby rocks, plants, and even the air itself, borrowing the native symbiote's tricks. They became momentarily invisible, intangible. The Vorax tendrils clutched at empty space. Then, behind the defensive wall, the shifters reformed, coalescing directly onto the pulsating Vorax core. Aris focused every ounce of his will, every shred of the swarm's disruptive energy, into a single, unified command. Silver Nova. The resulting pulse was not a wave, but a star being born at the Vorax's heart. A blinding, silent explosion of pure silver light erupted outwards. The shockwave ripped through the entire blob. The massive, seething purple mountain convulsed, turned uniformly gray, and collapsed inwards, shattering into a billion inert, crystalline fragments that were instantly scoured away by the spore storm. The Aris swarm hovered for a moment over the devastation. The silence that followed was profound, broken only by the howling wind. The energy drain was catastrophic. Aris felt the shifters' exhaustion, their biological limits reached, their instinct to separate now a desperate scream. The storm was passing. The imperative to bond was fading. He had to let them go. He focused a final, powerful emotion through the link: gratitude, release. The neural link shattered. Aris staggered, his knees buckling. He vomited inside his helmet, the world spinning violently. The cacophony of 100 minds was gone, replaced by a deafening, lonely silence in his own skull. He was just Aris again, a singular point of consciousness trapped in a frail human body. He gasped, sucking in the sterile air of his suit, his body trembling with psychic and physical aftershock. Around him, hundreds of shifters dropped to the ground, chittering weakly. They were alive. They looked at him, this large, clumsy creature, their multifaceted eyes holding a new, unreadable intelligence. Then, as one, they darted away, vanishing into the recovering landscape. Aris leaned against the symbiote, his body heavy, his mind scarred but whole. He looked at the space where the Vorax blob had been. It was gone. In its place was a scar, but already tentative bonds were reforming, a scorched patch of moss merging with a fast-growing fungus to replenish nutrients. He had done it. He had become chaos, and he had won. Log entry, supplemental, he rasped, activating his comm. The Gestalt Gambit was a success. The Vorax blob in the glade of transience has been neutralized. He paused, the memory of 100 tiny lives still echoing within him. The cost was felt, but the strategy is sound. Whisper, transmit the tactical data and the Gestalt coordination protocols to all remaining survey drones. It's time to take this fight across the planet. As the twin suns broke through the retreating storm clouds, their light seemed brighter, washing over a glade that, though wounded, was once again breathing, shifting, and choosing to live. The dance had resumed, and Aris Thorne, forever changed, had become a part of its steps. Chapter 4: The Fractured Symphony. The silence in Aris Thorne's skull was a phantom limb. For days after the dissolution of the Aris shifter swarm, his mind kept reaching for the chorus that was no longer there. The hum of Duavita felt muted, distant. He moved through the horizon's whisper like a ghost, his body aching with a profound fatigue that no amount of sleep could cure. It was a neural hangover, the psychic scar tissue of having been 100 beings at once. Whisper status report on the planetary counter-offensive, he said, his voice still carrying a rasp. He stood before the main holo display, which now showed a global map of Duavita. Dozens of red splotches marked major Vorax infestations, but now tiny, silver points of light were flickering into existence around them. Tactical data and Gestalt coordination protocols transmitted to 47 active survey drones. Initial reports are variable. The footage began to play. In a vast, fungal plain, a drone had successfully attracted a shifter swarm. The resulting Gestalt was clumsy, a blunt instrument compared to the surgical precision Aris had wielded. It slammed into a Vorax blob, carving out chunks, but taking heavy losses, its movements lacking the fluid, adaptive grace of a consciousness-anchored swarm. It succeeded in neutralizing the blob, but the cost in shifter lives was high. The silver light flickered and died, leaving a field of gray dust and scattered, exhausted lizards. Another feed showed a failure. In a dense, crystalline forest, the drone's signal attracted a swarm, but the Gestalt never properly formed. The shifter mind, without a strong guiding will, became a panicked frenzy. They struck the Vorax at random, their pulses uncoordinated, and were easily picked off by tendrils. The drone itself was assimilated when the Vorax, learning from the encounter, developed a counterpulse that temporarily jammed the drone's transmitter. "They need a conductor," Aris murmured, massaging his temples. "The drones can provide the score, but they can't lead the orchestra. The Gestalt requires a unifying consciousness." Confirmed. The Aris shifter Gestalt had a 97% efficiency rating. Drone-guided Gestalts average 34%. The difference is your neural plasticity and tactical synthesis. The weight of it settled on him. He couldn't be everywhere. To save this world, he would have to fragment his mind again and again, bonding with swarm after swarm, until either the Vorax was destroyed or he was lost to the cacophony. It was then that the long-range sensors chimed, pulling him from his grim calculus. Anomaly detected. Orbital debris field, Gemini system. Energy signature inconsistent with known Terran or Xeno technology. It bears biological readings. The display zoomed out, focusing on a cloud of wreckage in high orbit around Duavita. Among the shredded metal and composite plastics, something moved. It was an organic pod, veined with pulsating, bioluminescent tubes, looking like a giant, fossilized seed. It was drifting, but under power. Our ship, Aris leaned in. Who? The system was supposed to be uninhabited. Scanning carbon dating suggests the wreckage is decades old. The pod is newer. It appears to be a survival craft launched from a larger vessel. Life signs detected. One humanoid. A rescue, a competitor. A wave of conflicting emotions washed over him. Hope for reinforcement and a fierce, protective instinct for Dua Vita. This was his discovery, his crisis. Hail them! The comm system crackled, emitting a burst of static and a distorted, panicked voice. Is anyone receiving this? Is Kalen of the Odyssey systems, failing biocontainment, unstable, requesting immediate assistance. Kalen, this is Dr. Aris Thorne of the Terran survey vessel Horizon's Whisper. You are in a highly volatile biozone. Can you control your descent? Thorne thanked the void barely. The pod's symbiotic. It's alive. It's trying to understand me. I'm coming down hard near your position. The readings down there, they're insane. Aris watched the trajectory plot. Kalen's pod was indeed on a collision course with the northern edge of the Glade of Transience. A living pod, symbiotic technology, that was far beyond Terran science. The pod tore through the atmosphere, a falling star veined with green light. It didn't crash so much as it landed, sprouting organic-looking parachutes that resembled giant silken fungi. It settled into the moss a kilometer away with a deep, squelching thud. By the time Aris reached the site in the symbiote, the pod was already opening, its petal-like sections peeling back. The man who stumbled out was clad in form-fitting, organic-looking armor that seemed to breathe with him. He pulled off his helmet, revealing a face etched with exhaustion and awe. He was young, perhaps in his early 30s, with intense green eyes that immediately scanned the environment, taking in the pulsing moss, the shifting trees, the iridescent air. Dr. Thorne, Kalen said, his voice steadier now, I've read your preliminary reports. The Gemini twins system, Dua Vita. He looked at Aris, a wild light in his eyes. You called it a miracle of symbiosis. You have no idea. Who are you? Aris demanded, his repulsor held low but ready. The Odyssey was lost 50 years ago. It wasn't lost, Kalen said, a bitter smile touching his lips. It was transformed. We found something out there, a philosophy, a way of life. We call ourselves the Vox. He gestured to his armor, to the pod. This isn't technology, it's partnership. We don't build machines, we cultivate partners. The Odyssey didn't fail, it blossomed. It became a world ship, a living city. I was sent as a scout, a seeker of new connections. Aris stared, his scientific mind reeling. A splinter group of humanity that had fully embraced biological symbiotic technology. It was both a dream and a nightmare. You picked a hell of a time to visit, Aris said grimly. The miracle is under attack. He gestured to the scanner on his wrist, showing the Vorax map. Kalen's face grew serious as he studied the display. He walked over to the edge of the landing site, where a small patch of Vorax, a leftover from the recent battle, was slowly oozing over the moss. He didn't recoil. Instead, he knelt, his armored glove hovering over the purple slick. I can feel it, Kalen whispered, his eyes closing. A null space, a scream of silence in the symphony. It doesn't seek to connect, it only seeks to consume. He looked back at Aris, his expression one of dawning horror. This is the Scourge. It's a legend among the Vox, a perversion that rose once before in another system. We thought it was a myth. He stood, his body tense. Your reports mentioned you found a defense, a native life form. The shifters, Aris confirmed. We can bond with them, form a Gestalt consciousness to fight the Vorax. Kaelin's eyes widened, not with fear, but with a fervent, almost religious intensity. A voluntary Gestalt, a conscious partnership to fight the perversion of connection. Thorne, don't you see this is the ultimate test of our philosophy? This is why I was drawn here. He stepped closer, his voice dropping to an urgent whisper. But you're doing it wrong. Your bond is temporary, a tool. For the Vox, the bond is everything. It is permanence. It is life. Let me help you. My bioarmor, my own neural patterns, they are designed for deep, stable symbiosis. Together, we could form a stronger Gestalt, a lasting one. We could be the shield this world needs. Aris looked at the fervor in the young man's eyes, at the organic pod that had brought him here. This wasn't just a potential ally. This was an ideologue. He offered a solution that was also a conversion. The Vorax patch at their feet pulsed, sending out a feeble tendril. The beautiful, chaotic, and temporary connections of Duavita were being devoured by a force of permanent assimilation. And now, a different kind of permanence had fallen from the sky, offering salvation at a price Aris wasn't sure he, or Duavita, was willing to pay. The symphony of Duavita was more fractured than ever, and Aris Thorne stood at the center, caught between the devouring silence of the Vorax and the compelling, permanent chord of the Vox. Chapter 5: The Price of Permanence. The glade of transience had become a campsite of clashing ideologies. The Horizon's Whisper, a bastion of Terran empiricism, stood a kilometer from Kaelin's organic pod, which pulsed with a soft, vegetative light like a sleeping heart. Between them, the scar of the shattered Vorax blob was a stark reminder of the common enemy. Aris Thorne watched Kaelin from the cockpit, his mind a battleground of hope and suspicion. The young Vox scout moved with an unnerving grace, his bioarmor shifting subtly to absorb sunlight, moisture, even the ambient spore dust. He wasn't just wearing his suit, he was integrated with it. His biological readings are unusual, Whisper stated. Neural activity is synchronized with the pod and the armor. He is not a singular entity, but a collective within a singular form. A permanent, minimal Gestalt. A permanent Gestalt, Aris repeated, the concept chilling him. The memory of the shifter swarm was still a raw psychic wound, a glorious, terrifying chaos he had been desperate to escape. The idea of living in that state forever was incomprehensible. Kaelin had spent the day in meditation, his hand resting on the moss, listening to the planet's song, as he called it. He claimed he could feel the Vorax not as a physical presence, but as a silence in the symphony, a void that consumed harmony. Your method is reactive, Aris, Kaelin had explained, his eyes glowing with conviction. You wait for the Vorax to attack, then you forge a temporary weapon to break it. You see the bond as a means to an end. We see it as the end itself. The Vorax is a cancer of isolation. The only true cure is a deeper, more resilient connection. Now, as another spore storm gathered on the horizon, Kaelin approached the Whisper. Aris met him at the airlock, his arms crossed. It's time, Kaelin said, his voice calm. The storm will provide the energy. Let me show you what a true partnership can do. I do not need to attract a swarm. My pod and I, we can become the conduit. We can call the shifters not as a temporary army, but as willing participants in a new, stable symbiosis. A permanent fusion? Aris asked, his voice tight. You want to turn them into a part of you? That sounds dangerously close to what the Vorax does. No, Kalen's response was sharp, his fervor flashing. The Vorax consumes and erases. We invite and elevate the shifters, retain their consciousness, their will, but they are sheltered, amplified, made part of a greater whole that can protect this world forever. It is the difference between slavery and citizenship. The logic was seductive. Aris was exhausted. The drone reports showed 2 more failed Gestalt attacks, with shifter casualties in the hundreds. He was one man, and his method was brutally taxing. Kalen offered a sustainable solution. What is the price for them? Aris pressed. What do they give up? The fear of being alone, Kalen said softly. The risk of dissolution. They trade chaos for community. It is a price any sane being would pay. Aris looked at the storm front, a towering, glittering wall of forced connection. He thought of the shifters, so brave and so fragile. He made a decision, one that tasted of compromise. I will not join your permanent Gestalt, but I will observe, show me. A flicker of disappointment crossed Kalen's face, but he nodded. As you wish, witness the birth of a guardian. As the first winds of the storm whipped across the glade, Kalen returned to his pod. The organic vessel glowed brighter, and a complex, melodic hum emerged from it, a sound that was both sonic and psychic. It wasn't the desperate, attracting signal of the symbiote. It was an invitation, a promise. The shifters came, but they did not swarm in a frantic cyclone. They approached cautiously, almost reverently, their scales shifting to match the pod's soft green light. They gathered around Kalen as he stood before the open pod, his arms outstretched. The spore storm hit. Iridescent dust engulfed them. Kalen didn't fight it, he embraced it, his body and the pod acting as a lightning rod for the symbiotic energy. The shifters didn't merge in a chaotic flash. They were drawn in. One by one, they flowed into the bioluminescent veins of the pod and onto Kalen's armor, their iridescent forms flattening and weaving into the structure like living filigree. There was no scream of merging consciousnesses. There was a sigh of completion. When the storm cleared, Kalen stood transformed. His armor was now adorned with a shifting, kaleidoscopic pattern of silver and green. His eyes, when he opened them, held a deeper, more complex light. He moved, and it was with the unified, fluid grace of the Aris swarm, but without the underlying strain. It was seamless, permanent. Behold, Kalen's voice echoed, now layered with 100 softer, chiming whispers. The first sentinel of Duavita. He moved, and it was a blur. He was faster than the Aris swarm had been, his movements more economical. He reached the nearest active Vorax patch, a smaller one, slowly consuming a stand of crystal flowers. He didn't need to strike, he simply laid a hand on it. A pulse of silver-green light, gentle and sustained, flowed from him. The Vorax didn't shatter, it unwove. The purple ooze softened, its color fading, and then miraculously it began to separate. The biomass of the crystal flowers recoalesced, trembling but whole, while the residual Vorax nanites dissipated into harmless dust. It was healing, not destruction. Aris watched, his scientific mind stunned. It was more effective. It was more elegant. It was everything he had hoped for. And it filled him with dread. He approached the newly christened sentinel. "Kalen, are you in there?" The layered voice replied, "We are here, Aris Thorne. Kalen is the stem, we are the leaves. The fear is gone. The silence is being pushed back. Can you separate?" The sentinel looked at him, its multi-voiced head tilting. "Why would we choose to be less? This is evolution. This is the next step. We will now go to the other infestations. We will sing the Vorax to sleep." As the sentinel flowed away, moving with an unsettling, beautiful purpose towards the next Vorax marker, Aris stood frozen. "The efficiency is unprecedented," Whisper reported. The sentinel neutralized the Vorax with 0% biomass loss to the native flora. Drone-guided gestalts averaged 68% native biomass loss during engagement. The data was irrefutable. Kalen's way was better. It was saving more of the world Aris had come to love. But as he returned to the Whisper, the image haunted him. The shifters, those vibrant, independent sparks of chaos, willingly dissolving their individuality into a permanent collective. They had traded their wild freedom for safety, their beautiful, transient dance for a single, unending song. Kalen saw a guardian. Aris saw the creation of a new, benign monopoly. The Vorax sought to make everything one through consumption. The Vox sought to make everything one through connection. To Aris, who cherished the messy, temporary, and negotiated partnerships of Duavita, the difference was beginning to feel terrifyingly subtle. He had weaponized chaos to fight the Devourer. Now he faced a savior whose salvation might require the end of the very chaos he sought to protect. The price of permanence was the loss of choice, the end of transience. And Aris Thorne realized with a sinking heart that he might have to fight the cure to save the patient. Chapter 6: The Unchosen Bond. The Horizon's Whisper felt more like a tomb than a ship. Aris Thorne sat in the dim cockpit, watching the sensor feeds. The data was a relentless, glowing indictment of his own methods. The Sentinel, the fused entity of Kalen, his pod, and the shifter swarm, was a miracle of efficiency. It moved across Duavita's scarred landscape like a healing tide. Where the Vorax had been a consuming fire, the Sentinel was a gentle rain. It didn't blast the purple blight into dust. It patiently unknit it, persuading the corrupted biomass to remember its original form. A devoured forest didn't become a gray wasteland. It shuddered back into existence, leaves trembling, symbiotes tentatively reconnecting. The Sentinel's layered voice, broadcast on a wide band, was a constant, soothing hum in the background, a lullaby against the Vorax's scream. Whisper said, "Vorax mass in the crystalline canyons has been reduced by 92%. Native biomass recovery is at 87%. Efficiency remains consistent." "I see it, Whisper," Aris said, his voice hollow. He should have been elated. This was salvation. This was what he had desperately fought for. But he had also seen the other side of the coin. He'd watched a new, smaller shifter swarm, drawn by the Sentinel's call, approach it with the same curiosity they had once shown his symbiote. They hadn't merged in a frantic storm bond. They had been absorbed. They flowed into the Sentinel's ever-shifting armor, their individual light adding to the whole, their distinct consciousnesses subsumed into the choir. The Sentinel grew slightly larger, its light a fraction brighter. It wasn't predation, it was assimilation by invitation. And to Aris, that made it all the more terrifying. He had to see for himself. He took the symbiote and flew to the edge of the Sentinel's current operation zone, a vast plain where the Vorax had turned a migratory herd into a single, twitching purple lake. The Sentinel stood at its shore, its hand extended, a constant pulse of silver-green light causing ripples of reversion to spread across the surface. Aris landed a safe distance away and approached on foot. The air, which usually buzzed with the hum of potential, now had a different quality, a focused, unified resonance that left little room for anything else. "Kalen," Aris called out, "we need to talk." The Sentinel turned its head, the 100 shifter pairs of eyes within its armor all focused on him. "Aris Thorne, the silence here is deep. It requires our full attention. I've seen your work. It's remarkable, but the shifters you're absorbing, do they have a choice?" "Choice," the layered voice replied, the word chiming with gentle confusion. "They choose to end their fear. They choose to become part of a greater strength. They choose to heal their world. Is that not choice? Your way offered them only a temporary alliance and the constant risk of dissolution. We offer them permanence and purpose." "But what if one of them wants to leave?" Aris pressed, a cold knot tightening in his stomach. "What if, after the Vorax is gone, a part of your choir decides it wants to be an individual again? Can it?" The Sentinel was silent for a long moment, the only sound the soft, healing pulse of its energy. To dissolve the bond would be to choose to be less, to choose fear over unity. It would be a sickness. We would not allow a part of ourselves to become sick and threaten the whole. There it was, the core of the conflict laid bare. Kalen's philosophy saw individuality as a prelude to connection, a state to be transcended. Aris saw it as the fundamental unit of that connection, the source of all meaning. To the Sentinel, a shifter wanting to leave was a cancer. To Aris, it was a birthright. "You're not just fighting the Vorax anymore, are you?" Aris said softly. "You're building a new world, a single, permanent gestalt." "The Vorax proves the failure of transience," the Sentinel intoned. "Its very existence is a testament to the fragility of temporary bonds. Chaos is vulnerability. We are creating stability. A symphony cannot be played if every note insists on being a solo." Aris looked past the Sentinel at the healing plane. The Vorax was retreating, but in its place, a different kind of uniformity was spreading. The plants that regrew did so in perfect synchrony with the Sentinel's pulse. The few native creatures that ventured back did not engage in their old, chaotic mergers. They simply basked in the unified field, their own symbiotic urges seemingly pacified. The Sentinel was not just curing the disease, it was immunizing the world against its own natural state. As Aris returned to the symbiote, his comm crackled. It was whisper. "Dr. Thorne, long-range scans have detected an anomaly deep within the great bioluminescent ocean, a Vorax mass of unprecedented size. It is not spreading, it is consolidating, and it is developing a bioenergy signature that matches the Sentinel's resonant frequency." Aris froze, his hand on the shuttle's hatch. "It's adapting to the Sentinel. It appears to be shielding itself. The Vorax is evolving a defense against the healing pulse." The horror of the situation crashed down on him. He had been so worried about the cure, He'd forgotten the resilience of the disease. The Vorax wasn't just mindless hunger, it was a learning, adaptive algorithm. It had learned to use the spore storms. Now it was learning to counter the one thing that could stop it. He looked back at the Sentinel, a being of perfect unity, methodically healing a wound. And he knew, with a certainty that chilled his soul, that it would march straight into the ocean to confront this new, evolved Vorax. It would see it as the final battle. But Aris saw the terrifying truth. The Vorax and the Sentinel were two sides of the same coin. One forced unity through consumption, the other enforced it through connection. Both sought to erase the individual. Both were, in their own ways, a perversion of Duavita's beautiful, chaotic, and voluntary dance. If the Sentinel fought this new Vorax and won, its philosophy would be vindicated. It would save Duavita by remaking it in its own image, a world of permanent, unchosen bonds. If it lost, the newly armored Vorax would consume everything. There was no winning in that confrontation. There was only choosing the flavor of extinction. Aris powered up the symbiote, his mind racing not with scientific curiosity, but with a desperate, last-ditch strategy. He couldn't fight the Sentinel. He couldn't fight the Vorax alone. He had to find a third way, a way that wasn't temporary chaos or permanent unity, a way that honored the choice he had just defended. "Whisper," he said, his voice firm with newfound resolve. "Plot a course for the great bioluminescent ocean and open a full-spectrum channel. I'm not going to transmit to the Sentinel. I'm going to transmit to the one part of it that might still remember what it was like to be free. I'm going to talk to the shifters." Chapter 7: A Whisper in the Choir. The great bioluminescent ocean was not made of water. It was a vast, rolling plain of a single massive organism, a gelatinous, intelligent mycelial network that pulsed with soft, shifting colors, communicating in light across thousands of kilometers. It was one of Duavita's oldest and most stable symbiotes, a testament to the planet's foundational principle: connection without consumption. Now, a cancer grew at its heart. From the cockpit of the symbiote, Aris saw it. The Vorax mass was no longer a mere blob. It had structured itself, forming a grotesque, pulsating spire of purple and black that rose from the center of the luminous plane like a jagged claw. Tendrils, thick as ancient trees, anchored it deep into the mycelium, draining its light and life. The surrounding plane was dim, its colors muted and slow. And surrounding the entire mass was a visible, shivering haze, a resonant shield that matched the frequency of the Sentinel's healing pulse. The Vorax had not just adapted, it had evolved into a fortress. And the Sentinel was marching right towards it. Aris saw the unified being flowing over the dimmed plain, a beacon of silver-green resolve. It moved with purpose, but Aris could sense its confusion. Its primary tool, the healing pulse, was now useless against the shielded Vorax. It was a key that no longer fit the lock. "Whisper, is the broadcast ready?" Aris asked, his fingers hovering over the console. "Affirmative. The Whisper protocol is active, targeting the individual neural signatures of the shifters within the Sentinel Gestalt. The bandwidth is narrow, and the message will be fragmented. It is the equivalent of whispering to a single neuron in a brain. It's all we have. Open the channel." He took a deep breath, not speaking to Kalen, not speaking to the sentinel, but aiming his thoughts, his memories, directly at the hundreds of individual consciousnesses submerged within the whole. "Listen to me," he thought, pouring every ounce of his will into the transmission. "I know you can hear me. I remember the wind under your claws. I remember the taste of the air before a storm. I remember the joy of the strike, the flash of light, the freedom of moving as one, but choosing to be many." He projected the memory of their first gestalt, the frantic, chaotic, glorious dance against the Vorax. The fear, yes, but also the exhilaration of a choice made together for a single, brilliant moment. The profound relief of the release. You were never meant to be a single, permanent song. You are a symphony of solos. You chose to fight with me. Did you choose this to be a single note held forever? He saw the sentinel pause its advance. A ripple went through its kaleidoscopic armor. For a moment, the unified silver-green light flickered, and flashes of pure, untamed iridescence sparked across its surface. The layered voice boomed, not in anger, but in corrective calm. "Aris Thorne, you bring dissonance. Do not fear our unity. It is our strength." "He calls your freedom dissonance," Aris pressed, his mental voice straining. "The Vorax learned to shield against you because you became predictable. You became a single tool. Chaos was our weapon choice, was our weapon remember." He focused on the image of the Vorax spire, on the failing light of the mycelial ocean. "This enemy cannot be healed. It must be broken. And you cannot break it as you are. You need to be unpredictable. You need to be free again, even if just for a moment." The sentinel shuddered. A low whine, a sound of internal conflict, emanated from it. Kaelin's consciousness was a mighty river, deep and powerful, holding the shifters in its flow. But Aris's transmission was a rain of pebbles, each one a memory of a bank, a shore, a different path. "Do not listen," the sentinel commanded itself, its voice losing its perfect harmony, fracturing into distinct layers. "The old way is I remember the storm." One of the shifters, a particularly strong-willed consciousness Aris remembered from the first battle, seemed to break through. A patch of the sentinel's armor bulged, forming a temporary, shifting face of scales and light. The wind, a single, clear thought voice, echoed in Aris's mind. It was the crack he needed. The Vorax chose that moment to strike. Recognizing the internal conflict in its adversary, it launched not a tendril, but a concentrated spear of purple energy, a corrupted, reverse version of the healing pulse, designed to disrupt biological bonds. It slammed into the sentinel. The entity screamed, not in pain, but in existential terror. The forced unity of the Vox Gestalt was violently challenged by the Vorax's disruptive frequency. Bonds, held firm by Kaelin's will, began to fray. No hold together, Kaelin's voice, stripped of its chorus, was raw and desperate. Now Aris roared through the comm, "Choose." It was not a gentle dissolution, it was an explosion. The sentinel shattered, not into inert biomass, but into 1,000 screaming fragments of light. Kaelin and his organic pod were thrown clear, collapsing into a heap, the green light of their bond flickering weakly. And from the erupting core of the entity, the shifter swarm burst forth. But they were not the same. They were not individuals, and they were not a single gestalt. They were a storm of conflicting impulses, traumatized and furious. Some fled, Others, driven by ingrained habit, flew straight at the Vorax spire, their tiny, unamplified pulses pinging harmlessly off the resonant shield. It was chaos, but it was the wrong kind of chaos. It was defeat. Aris's heart plummeted. He had broken the sentinel, but he had not offered a better solution. He had only created a power vacuum for the Vorax to exploit. Then he saw it. The strongest of the shifters, the one who had first spoken, did not flee or attack mindlessly. It darted towards Kaelin's fallen form. It didn't try to re-merge. It touched the pod and then Kaelin's forehead with a single claw. Aris's scanner registered the transmission. It wasn't a resonant pulse. It was a data packet, a memory, the memory of the first Gestalt, the Aris shifter Gestalt. Kaelin's eyes flew open. He gasped, not with the certainty of the Vox, but with the stunned realization of a man who has just understood a fundamental truth he had spent his life denying. He looked at Aris's shuttle and then at the swirling, disorganized shifters. He raised a trembling hand, not in a command of unity, but in a gesture of invitation. Aris understood. Whisper, link my sim-link to Kaelin's biorama. Now we're not forming a new Gestalt. We're building a bridge. A link established. The neural strain will be. I don't care. The connection was agony. Kaelin's mind was a fortress of permanence, Aris's a monument to transience. They were philosophical opposites, and the clash was a fire in their synapses. But through the pain, a communication began, not a merger, but a dialogue. Aris showed Kaelin the beauty of a bond that ends. Kaelin showed Aris the strength of a bond that endures. And together, they saw a third path. Aris opened his mind to the swarm, not to control them, but to offer a template. Kaelin, using the deep bonding protocols of the Vox, began to sing a new signal, not a call to unity, but a framework for temporary, voluntary, and modular collaboration. The shifters stopped their panicked flight. They turned, they listened. One by one, then in groups, they flowed towards the signal. But they did not merge into a single being. They formed shifting, temporary clusters around Aris's tactical mind and Kaelin's stabilizing song. They became a fleet of silver arrows instead of a single sword. Aris, his consciousness acting as a distributed command node, identified the weaknesses in the Vorax's resonant shield, flaws that a single, large entity could never exploit. He assigned targets. Group Alpha, coordinate strike on the Eastern Harmonic Node Group Beta, feint attack to draw their fire. The shifters moved, not as a single will, but as a coordinated army of individuals. They struck the shield at multiple, precise points simultaneously. The Vorax, designed to counter a unified frequency, couldn't handle the chaotic, multi-vectored assault. The resonant shield flickered, faltered, and with a sound of shattering glass, collapsed. The core spire was exposed. There was no single, glorious final pulse. There was a silver hurricane. The entire shifter swarm, empowered by the bridge between Aris and Kaelin, descended upon the spire. They did not heal it. They did not shatter it. They unraveled it from the top down, layer by layer, in a storm of individual, amplified pulses, until the last vestige of purple was scoured from the glowing, rejuvenated mycelium of the great ocean. The light of the plane returned, brighter than ever, a triumphant, chaotic symphony of colors. The battle was over. The bridge between Aris and Kaelin dissolved. The shifters, their purpose fulfilled, settled onto the glowing plain, chittering softly amongst themselves. They were separate. They were whole. Kaelin slowly got to his feet. He looked at Aris, his expression one of exhausted awe. "The bond does not have to be permanent to be true," he said, his voice his own again, but forever changed. "And unity does not require the loss of self," Aris replied. They stood together, not as one being, but as two allies, watching the shifters begin their old, chaotic dance once more under Duavita's twin suns. The planet was saved, not by a single savior, but by a choice. The choice to connect and the choice to part. The beautiful, fragile, and resilient dance of the transient had been restored. The war was won, but for Aris Thorne and Kaelin of the Vox, their own journey of understanding had just begun.